Okay, I will try to stand there. I will try to stay there.
And I can repeat the questions if you need me to,
Okay.
but they'll be on the screen too. So,
We'll
but
have to repeat any of the in-room questions since there's no mic.
okay. All right.
Still, no one, not a soul in the first. I assure you that the front rows are just as comfortable as any other row. I promise. Seats are the same level of cushion. You get a better view. I want you to be comfortable. I don't know if this is a necessary buffer zone or. You want to kick it off? And Anton's on there too, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Hey everybody, I'm Matt Grid. I'm this year's vice chair of College Council. And next year's chair. So thanks for coming to our last budget forum of the academic year. I just want to do some College Council, I guess, housekeeping before we get started. So everybody that's in the black on this chart, they have already served a year on College Council, but everybody in red are new folks that are joining us next year. So Munku Jun from Culinary is going to be our full-time faculty rep. Jennifer Mills is going to be our full-time faculty as well. Oh, Munku is for Prof Tech, and then Jen Mills at large. And then Zara is going to be our full-time faculty from BTS. And then next year we'll work with the United Student Association to get the president involved and then snag 2 more students to get their voices involved in College Council. Oh, and Krista Zinke is our secretary. Yay. So I just want to go over a couple things that College Council is working on. This year, stuff that we're still working on, projects that are ongoing. So this year and next year, we're going to continue doing the quarterly budget forums. We've gotten good feedback from the campus community about them and just more gathering feedback about the budget process. So those are going to continue. I don't know if you guys remember from the beginning of the year, we did a lot of communication around the viaduct closure. We had a viaduct forum with help with, we had a lot of help from USA with that. So that was another project we did. We have ongoing discussions about emergency preparedness, especially with snow, because I know that always creeps up on us here. This year we got a new pride flag with new colors to represent the trans flag and people of color. So that's going up in a couple days on the flagpole. Woo! We talked about student parking fees. We are in discussion about getting a ballot box on our campus for voting. Importance of student college email use. So a lot of discussion about how students get their information, how they're communicating, and how they know what's happening on campus through email and other sources. And we just submitted a proposal to the President's Cabinet about possibility of getting a documented student support center on campus and possibly a position to guide those students, help those students, support those students more on campus. This is another thing we're working on. So student approached us about graffiti on the side of Olympic Hall. I don't know if you saw that. So we got that covered up. Facilities was kind enough to paint over it, but we also got this idea of having an ongoing mural project on campus and getting more public art on our campus. So we're just trying to, we just created a mural task force. So we're kind of just seeing how that's going to play out, if it's going to be a class or student, it's going to be student led. So still in discussions about that. And then big shout out to Jeffrey, the USA president, for helping us get the Clean Air Task Force pretty much off the ground. And then a recommendation about going smoke free was sent to President's Cabinet, Rosie and the President's Cabinet. So that's what we've been kind of working on this year. And just a reminder about the changes changes to the budget process this year from the previous years. So we're starting the budget process in the fall instead of the spring. So it gives us a lot of time to get budget priorities and get feedback from the campus. This year, a lot of what College Council was doing was speaking with the campus community about what we want to spend our money on, what we want to prioritize, and a lot of those surveys that were sent out were about the budget priorities and what you guys want to spend your money on. So encouraging input from the campus community. And this is just a way for everyone to influence the budget decisions going forward. And a lot of the tools we're using is surveys, Zoom, which I know there's probably about 20 people on Zoom watching now, and feedback forms. So after this forum, please do fill out the form that we send out and let us know how we can improve. And our last College Council meeting is on June 10th from 1 to 2:30. And at that one, we're going to nominate the vice chair for next year. So I was vice chair this year. I'm going to be chair next year. So we're going to nominate the vice chair. And if you have somebody who you think would be good in that position, email either myself or Anton, the chair, and we can reach out to them and see if they'd be interested. Okay, these are the questions for later. So I'm going to turn it over to Rosie. Just go full screen?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, you can leave it like that because then I can toggle back if I need to.
Maybe up here.
It's okay. Just, you're going to monitor the Zoom to make sure we're catching questions along the way.
I will on my phone.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I admit I have some of the nerves for this presentation. But I think it's because it's such vital information that has potential for such impact, and I'm hyper conscious to want to deliver it in a way that folks can really understand it and engage with it and really feel like you can ask questions about it. So I'm going to move us through what I prepared for a presentation. I do encourage questions along the way. However, please note that for those that are on Zoom, they won't be able to hear your questions, so I'll be trying to repeat them as you ask them, just to make sure. We weren't able to get a mic because SpringFest has literally every mic on campus engaged right now. So that wasn't possible this time, but it's definitely something we're working on for the future. So ask questions along the way, but also know that Mac and Anton have been collecting the questions that have been coming in through the web, and they have those for us to respond to as well. So questions will be, there's going to be a whole robust section for questions as well. But if anything needs clarity as we go along, please don't hesitate to let me know. So this is the culmination of what we have been working towards with a new approach to budget development this year. And I wanted to walk us back through what the process has been and what we're looking forward to in the future. See, this is where I realize I'm really a presenter who likes to move, and I'm feeling really constrained by my little paper towel, which indicates where to stand so people can see me on screen. So I'm going to be doing some of this. We started this in the fall with College Council leading a prioritization effort. And so there were College Council meetings, there was a budget forum, and there was a survey to collect what folks on campus felt were the priorities for the budget as we implemented it this year and to inform development for the coming year. And I'll walk us through how we're treating some of those. Then in the winter, utilizing that information along with some cabinet approaches that we identified, we provided budget guidance for the budget managers on campus. So in winter quarter, budget managers, that's deans and directors, started to build the budgets based on what their operational needs were and on what the feedback was that we gave them. I will send this out as a PDF afterwards, so so that folks can refer back to it as well. And then it went to, depending on the area, it went in for VP's review. So the instructional deans sent their budgets up to the VPI. The VPI kind of approved those and sent those over to the VP of Administrative Services office. And then the cabinet at the same time was working through projections and planning. So we were looking at things that were coming in at one point trying to assume a flat budget, but then trying to anticipate what some of the impacts are that we know are coming in the next fiscal year and starting to prepare for those in the planning process. And here we are today receiving College Council feedback in the orange arrow there. After this round of feedback, the president, really the cabinet, will finalize, and I put that in quotes because nothing's ever final until it's actually in the FMS. The president will finalize what our budget plan is for the coming year. And then at that point, it gets further refined by Siegel level decisions, and then the actual state allocation and any guidance that the state board gives us into how allocations are to be applied. And then budgets are really finalized and entered hopefully in July, August period ahead of us starting up the academic year. So what you can see though is that, and with apologies to those on the Zoom, walking away, I mean, we're here, but really the finalization happens out here. So what I'm hoping to present to you today is our best plans based on the projections that we're able to have or make and the information that we actually have in hand. And do know that in this period here, there is room for change. There's room for shift. There's room for shift upward or downward, depending on what type of new information we get. So just know that what I'm presenting today isn't the be-all end-all for the next academic year. What it is our best ability to put a plan together with a number of shifting priorities. So, and this is sort of a redux of some of that, but some of the engagement efforts, because we've really tried to increase transparency and engagement around both the budget management this year, but also around the budget planning into the next year. So we really started by trying to strengthen the partnership with College Council, and Mac and Anton have been great partners to me personally, but also to Cabinet in thinking about how to do that better and really take advantage of the role of College Council as our shared governance body on campus. And I am looking to further evolve that into the future. So reflecting on how things went this year, what would we add and do differently? What could we learn from what other colleges do effectively moving into next year? We also did start those quarterly budget forums. So it wasn't just a big run up to this forum and telling everybody everything new about the budget for the first time. It was laying some tracks each quarter about how we were working with the numbers and the factors that we knew about. And we've tried to keep budget on every gathering agenda. So it was on management team. It was on, we talked about it in cabinet listening sessions. We talked about it in the budget forum. So you, depending on how many of those meetings you're going to, you were hopefully hearing about it many times. And with apologies, you're probably hearing some repeated messages throughout the year as well. And then also through email updates, really utilizing communications via, I mean, I know that everybody's overwhelmed with email, but it is our primary way to send formal notification of information. So utilizing them through Monday Message, through special budget emails. I did the budget video. So we'll continue to try to refine that. So appreciate the feedback folks have been sending in around that. We also started the ask.rosie email this year, which actually several of you have used. And so thank you for doing that. We're just trying to keep it so that questions that come in around budget or planning for the campus don't get lost in my personal email inbox, but it goes to ask.rosie, and then I and then a couple of other folks from Cabinet can monitor it and make sure that responses are being put out there timely. So Cabinet identified some of our shared principles for how we were going to work with budgets this year. I'm going to walk you through this kind of quickly, so stop me if you have questions. First, we wanted to acknowledge that the process is challenging, different, and uncertain. It's hard because of all those factors I described earlier. Budget plans are based on estimates, and estimates change throughout the process. At one point, we were working with estimates that said that anything that the state approved for cost of living was going to be a third funded by the college. And then now we know that it's 100% funded by the state legislature. So that was a change in our budgeting process. Our priority was to go for targeted and strategic reductions and to avoid across the board cuts or cuts of convenience. We also really tried to opt for a clear rationale for decisions and a willingness to transparently share it with the campus community. So we didn't make any decisions that we weren't going to be able to easily explain and defend, essentially, with our colleagues. So it wasn't going to be sort of we were trying to really not have the impression that there were backroom deals or that certain decision makers went away and then came back with a surprise decision. We wanted to make sure that we were making decisions that were informed, but then that would be informative back out to the community. And then we also work to acknowledge that there's differences in impact in the different areas. So a 2.5% cut feels different in one area than another, sometimes based on size, sometimes based on the composition of where the budget is spent, as an example. And then we also identified that departments have both responsibility and accountability for the planning and the stewardship of the resources. So we can build a great budget, but if at the departmental budget manager level, it's not responsibly and accountably managed, then it undoes the effectiveness of a well-planned budget. So we really upheld that responsibility. And then leadership would support the budget once it's decided. We would not undercut other areas or say, well, you know, or undermine one another, that we would come out with a strong single voice around what we were building as the budget together. We also wanted to make it a collaborative process and an opportunity for involvement as determined by division. We knew that involvement in student services around the budget looks different than involvement in instruction, looks different than involvement in admin services, looks different than involvement in international, for example. So we wanted it to be collaborative, not just across the divisions, but within the divisions in the ways that made most sense to those working areas. And establishing a sustainable financial model, it's just good math. I was able to do, I had to do a faculty tenure observation just before this, and it happened to be Harris Mujahid's a managerial accounting class, and he was talking about managerial budgeting, and it was the best possible class to go and observe right before I had to do this, and he was sort of, it was a good chance. I actually took notes in his class on here about how to talk about budget. Just a reminder to me, but it was good because it was sort of affirming of the way we've been trying to approach our budget development process. And to the extent that was possible, we wanted to continue to try to find opportunities for further investment. And we also hold each other to have the responsibility to be informed and educated. That we couldn't, any leader couldn't come in and just spout about something and because they were uninformed about how the discussion was developing. We wanted folks at the leadership level to be informed and engaged at all times. So to get to the college priorities, these are what the College Council developed with your input and delivered to Cabinet. Cabinet had worked with these throughout the process. So I want to give you updates on how the 10 priorities have been treated through the budget planning process. So the number one priority was to reduce class cancellations. And so you'll see I have a little like icon key here, but star means that it was prioritized. That this, we actually addressed this in the current academic year budget by assigning the VPI a contingency budget, so that if during the year demand for courses exceeded any one unit's budget, that the VPI had the ability to apply funds and support additional sections and courses being added. What this doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that, it's a triple negative, it doesn't mean that no classes were canceled. But please know that any classes that were canceled this year were not due to budget, they were due to low enrollment in those classes. We still need to run classes at a minimum level so that it makes fiscal sense. But we did not have any class cancellations that were due to budget. They were due to enrollment if they occurred at all. And so we'll continue that practice moving forward so that instruction maintains that flexibility to respond to demand as it comes in. The second priority was to invest more in the replacement of campus infrastructure and or increase our custodial staff to provide better service. And this is actually relates to some of the questions that came in from online. So we are going to be prioritizing an additional custodial position to be added. We do need to, and I gave this a half a star because the infrastructure piece, the furniture and the fixtures replacements, that needs to be studied and understood more. That comes out of a separate budget from operations. And so working with the campus services area to look at what does that budget look like? How do we prioritize there? And then if we have opportunity, how would we add to that budget to get to some more of the replacements? I hear your concerns. I've heard and seen for myself descriptions of areas of the campus that are falling into disrepair, chairs that are stained, blinds that are broken, you know, things like that. I hear you. And we've got great remarks on how beautiful our grounds are, and we want to make sure that the insides of our buildings are just as welcoming to students. So I hear you loud and clear, and we will be taking this on for further study and further action, we hope, as we move forward at this point. So I called this one partially prioritized. Odessa Woodley did a great job of educating me about custodial staff. I don't have, well, I have my notes somewhere, but essentially for one 8-hour shift employee should be able to cover 30,000 square feet of campus in an 8-hour shift. And I can't remember off the top of my head, the number of square footage that we have on campus and at Georgetown means that we need 5 more full-time custodians than we currently have. So forgive me because I'm giving you numbers in a verbal way. But what we're hoping to do is work on adding those custodial services incrementally so that we can reach the recommended number of custodial staff to maintain our entire facility, including Georgetown. The challenging thing with facilities is even if enrollments decline, if demand declines, the footprint of our campus doesn't shrink. We don't shut down certain buildings that don't need to be maintained anymore. The footprint of the building stays the same. So regardless of what happens with FTEs, we need to get our facilities maintenance to a really sustainable level for the size of campus that we are. And I'll have more detail with dollars towards the end here. The third priority was to increase student recruitment and outreach efforts. So if this is ongoing, while there's no specific dollars allocated to specific recruitment, out of the college budget, the Seattle Promise that's coming online for next year really functions as a large recruitment and outreach. I'm looking at Alex, a recruitment and outreach effort, at least with the high school population. And I know that our outreach, there's kind of an outreach team. It used to just be Vanessa, but there's a team that includes Nick from ProfTech. It includes Christian and our folks that work with Seattle Promise. They have been getting together and talking about also how do we ensure what the working adult or the adult outreach looks like as well. So I know they've been doing that work. So while there's no additional investments this year, it continues to be a priority because it does feed our enrollments, which I'll talk about also. The fourth priority, focusing efforts on adapting to our market and community needs and connecting industry to our college programs. This also I call ongoing. It's work that's underway. It's work that should be guided by our technical advisory committees. And it's also work that's called for in the program viability process. So there are folks that are doing work to make sure that these links are built and strengthened as we move forward. Consider hiring a grant writer for pursuing external grants and or move important grant funded positions to state funds. So this was kind of a two-parter. We're putting a pin in this one. That's why there's a push pin there. I'm calling this one deferred. Cabinet actually researched and pursued a grant strategy to increase our capacity to write more grants and to bring in more revenue into the college. We have decided at this moment to defer this investment because of the other things that are on our plate in terms of our finances. And so I hope to revisit it mid-year with Cabinet to look at our mid-year finances and see if there are cost savings to enable us to start this, at least at this point. I'm admitting this person. Open access. Let's see. Oops, I skipped 6. Create a more structured student experience for all students based on guided pathways. This is prioritized. Guided pathways work continues. This has its own separate source of funding apart from our state allocation between the College Spark, the Title III grants, and even specially legislated funds. So that's prioritized. The 7th one, increase professional development with a focus on equity, inclusion, and diversity. So I called this partially prioritized. Professional development is supported in the grants, and there are pockets of professional development that occur across the campus. So Student Services does Dev Days, CDAC does Classified Development Days, there are Faculty Development Days. EDI-specific professional development is something that we're looking at investing in more from the grants in the coming years. So I call it partial because putting it on grants puts it on soft funds, puts it on temporary money. I believe what the intent of this priority is how do we institutionalize a focus on professional development for EDI? So I call that something that is a half star. We'll continue to keep working on that and building that up. And right now, we've got a proposal from some faculty around, they did an analysis around faculty development across the district to look as a way to look at South's structure for faculty development. And so they'll be coming to Cabinet to present that. And I'm gonna be looking, one of the things that you'll see later when we talk numbers, there's not a number next to it yet, but I wanna find a way to prioritize faculty development moving forward into this next year. Strengthen and prevent reduction of South FTEs. You'll see in the budget, we are adding funding for 320 additional annualized full-time enrollments in apprenticeships where there is ready demand right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we also empower deans to make sure to prioritize where they saw demand in their areas to try to strengthen reduction of FTEs or prevent reduction. The ninth one was to generate revenue through rental of on-campus facilities and exploring facility naming rights. So this is ongoing. Cabinet, for example, just approved of a revenue proposal that came out of the culinary area to look at increasing revenues in that area, also related to the coming remodel of Cafe Alki. And we're also, you'll see a position that's an investment out of Georgetown that will try to leverage better our rental capacity at Georgetown to generate more revenues. So Cabinet is very open to looking at more revenue generating ways, and so we'll be continuing to encourage that moving forward. And finally, and Mac mentioned this, expanding capacity to serve undocumented students, hiring a person, or developing other areas of support. College Council gave Cabinet a recommendation to add a position to support undocumented students and designate space. So we're considering that. We're trying to work with how to make that work with this year's budget or this coming year's budget, but it's something that Cabinet is reviewing as a priority and has good documentation around what we would do moving forward. So questions around college priorities and how those have been addressed. And Mac, you're gonna let me know if anything comes online. Okay, so I just wanna reiterate, we don't have a budget problem, we have an enrollment problem. And I've been trying to hammer this message home for folks so that we can come to agreement that what we're facing is what many other colleges are facing right now. I used the example in a previous meeting, Renton, who has a much earlier budgeting process, they were cutting upwards of $1 million. I think they were 1.6 million. They laid off over a dozen staff and closed several programs to make their budget work for next year. Other colleges are making similar decisions. It just so happens that Renton was first out of the gate, and I have committed their cuts to memory. But many colleges are having meetings just like this, where they're explaining reductions and explaining the environment that we're in. We are in an enrollment problem, in an enrollment crisis. So we have been in an enrollment decline for 4 years, over 4 years now. This data shows, and I shared this in the budget video, but I thought it fit to revisit here. This data shows something interesting. It shows you academic transfer here, BTS, BAS, Prof Tech, apprenticeship, and then the total number. So you'll see academic transfer saw an overall decrease of 3% over 4 years. And actually, I'm going to contextualize that a bit in my next slide. Basic and transitional studies has seen a 21% decrease over 4 years, on average about 7.5%, 8% decline each year. And these only count up to 17, 18 because that was the last completed academic year. BAS has seen a decline of 14%, and you can see the actual numbers served here. Prof Tech has seen a 24% decrease, and apprenticeships has seen a 79% increase. So overall, our net enrollment actually gained by 1% over the last 4 years. But that is important for folks to understand how our instructional mix matters. It doesn't mean that every department is even. It means that some growth in some areas is masking in the overall numbers decline in other areas.
Rosie, the Zoomers want you to stay right there.
Okay, sorry, Zoomers. I will reach. So just to reiterate, enrollments and tuition generate different things. Enrollments, actual student enrollment in courses, they generate FTEs, full-time equivalents, and that is the unit that our state allocation is based on. And they essentially generate funds that we can access in the coming years. Our enrollment will dictate what our allocation, how big our allocation is from the state in the coming years. Tuition generates money now. Tuition generates funds that we can access in the current year. And most, but not all enrollments actually generate tuition. So an important time to note that enrollment is countercyclic to the economy. We've talked about this before. You all are very familiar with this. When the economy is strong, enrollment goes down as people opt to work instead of study or train. And I'd also add that the cost of living in King County, we believe very strongly, is driving people out of the area. Their enrollment declines aren't as heavily felt at the colleges south of us, for example. That's where a lot of folks are shifting to live and therefore study and work. Except for apprenticeships, and I'll dig into that in a bit. And in our growth economy, apprenticeship training is in high demand because of our construction economy right now. All those cranes actually translate into actual apprenticeships, which translate into FTEs. So just a drill down into some of the special populations as well. So Running Start enrollment is an interesting one because it does shift how academic division, how the academic transfer division experiences enrollments. Enrollment has increased by 71% in the last 4 years. That's a huge growth for Running Start. The students don't pay tuition, so that doesn't help us on tuition, but the school districts pay us for each enrollment. So there's a rate that the state sets that we get for each and every enrollment from the school districts. The numbers have been steadily growing. We believe that they will level off eventually. Jesse and I were chatting, it feels like, and Tara can kind of confirm, it feels like we're approaching a leveling of this soon. We might see some incremental growth next year, but we may reach the point at which we start to level off. It does serve as a revenue generator. This is money that Running Start students sit in classes that are already funded by the state-funded students that are sitting in there. So the money that we get from Running Start actually serves as additional revenue above and beyond our allocation. The vast majority of Running Start students take transfer courses, and there's a smaller percentage that do take Prof Tech. I don't have it on the top of my head. I don't know if either of you two do.
It's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 5%
Okay.
do Prof Tech programs.
So that's a couple of dozen students essentially at our numbers that do Prof Tech. So the majority of them are in academic classes, which might be why, which it doesn't help explain that earlier slide where academic transfer only saw a 1% or a 3% decline over 4 years, because while the general population was declining, Running Start enrollments were increasing. And so the number of bodies and seats may not have changed much, even though the type of revenue they were generating, the tuition versus fees, did. International enrollments is another special population to pay attention to as far as the budget goes. They have been in steady decline directly related to the changing environment, both domestic and also Kathy and international folks have educated me about the fact that even though Trump happened and he has created an environment that has impacted international students and immigrant students as well, it has also been an increasingly competitive international market. Other countries have upped their international student, essentially their business model to try to attract more international students. So there's more countries competing for international students to study abroad. So international enrollment has declined by 10% over 4 years. And this is a long paragraph just to say that all the functions related to international programs and intensive English are both essentially self-support. They have to grow and contract with the size of the FTE population that comes in, because those students pay the full rate of attendance at the college, not even the state rate. And so it is fully essentially an enterprise function. And that the revenue has been declining along with the enrollments in international as well. So apprenticeships, the last kind of special population I want to talk about, has increased with the economy, as I said. It has increased 79% over 4 years, which is incredible. At one point, I think in 2017, it was actually technically our largest instructional program. The college this year, South intentionally reduced our FTEs this year because we could not afford all the contracts. Without going too far into detail, you have to pay for apprenticeship contracts. The college has to pay for apprenticeship contracts to come in and at a certain FTE level. And we just had not allocated enough money out of our operating budget to apprenticeships to be able to afford that. So that'll relate to later in the presentation how I explain and answer some of the questions that have come in online about how we're funding apprenticeships at South and across the district. So we did have to intentionally reduce. And so it does have the potential to grow if the college can decide it can afford more. And so and I'll show you that earlier slide again. So with apprenticeships in there, the college experienced a 1% increase over 4 years. If you take apprenticeships out of the equation for all 4 years, we would actually be at a 15% enrollment decline without apprenticeships at all.
So that can show you how big of the impact apprenticeships actually has. And so you'll, just to remind you here, I didn't put in a slide with that takes out apprenticeships, but without that 79% there, you can see how that drops down to 15% instead. Okay, this is just a quick refresher on the types of money we're talking about. There's different sources and types of funds. There's the state allocation, which is the one we tend to focus the most on. There's tuition, which I described earlier. Tuition is made up of full paid tuition and discounted tuition and international tuition. There are revenues. So Running Start falls into the category of a revenue. Rentals, any revenue we generate from rentals, for example. There's grants. We know we have a lot of those. There are fees. Fees are collected for specific purposes. So there's like a transcript fee that registration collects that pays for the processing and the staffing required to process transcripts. Parking fees, for example, that help in part pay for some security staff to monitor parking. There are student fees. They are collected from and they are supported and governed by students and students alone, essentially. There are also reserves. So these are funds that are held in the event of major unexpected costs or impact to our functions, and they're they're mandated by the Board of Trustees. So that's our reserves. And then there's also contingency. I used an example of a contingency earlier. Contingencies are monies that the college holds within our own budgets to fund unexpected one-time costs in a given year. So these are sometimes held for if there is a big vacation, I don't know if that's a legit example. Vacation buyouts go into here? Kinda. What's a good example of when we use a contingency other than the instructional one?
Oh, so if the state didn't give us money for the increases, I would be going straight to the contingency fund because we would have to still pay for those since they are mandated. And then any other type of unforeseen urgency.
Right.
It would have to be like a blizzard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We would have to at least warrant a serious conversation with the Board of Trustees to make sure.
Oh, that's the reserve, but our contingency internally, so Robin's suggestion, Robin's example for those that are on Zoom were some of the things that come up unexpectedly during the year. So these are the different types of funds that we are working with when we're building the whole budget. The two that are in color, state allocation and tuition, are the biggest ones that we try to work with when we build our operating budget, but we do consider these other ones. So time for budget impacts. These are the things that are happening to us that we had to use to build projections. So there are reductions to our budget coming. There's three of them, three key ones. One, reduction due to the state allocation changed. 3 years ago, the state board and the president's group decided on a new state allocation model, which left Seattle and some of the other larger districts in the loser category. It's always winners and losers when you change an allocation model. We ended up in the losers column. So we are heading into the third year of the reductions to our allocation based on that allocation change from a few years ago. There are fewer enrollments, which means there's less tuition coming in. There are fewer enrollments, which means there's less fee collection coming in. So for those of you who manage functions that are dependent on fees, you know that your fee collection is diminishing and you're struggling to figure out how to fund the previous functions out of that fee collection. And this is simplified. There's a bigger list, but just to give you a picture of this, increased expenses is the other thing that's impacting our budget. So sorry, Zoomers, I'll try to stand in one place. Increasing Siegel costs. The Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor for Finance were here to talk about that a couple weeks ago, and thank you for many of you who came and asked questions. Fact of the matter is, Siegel's costing more to operate. So we are paying more for Siegel increased costs. There are increased costs to doing business. We live and we work in a very high cost area. This past year, we went from $15 minimum wage to $16 minimum wage. Most of you were operating with flat budgets. For many of you, that meant that the number of service hours had to decrease to afford the higher rate of pay for the hourly staff that you manage. And we were also in a period where certain grant funds were going away and we were trying to shift funds trying to figure out what to do with those functions or how to shift them onto the state. So these are some of the most major impacts. And I think this is where I pause and say that there are no easy decisions at this point. It's important to note that at this point in the process, we have done all the easy cuts that we can do over the last several years. We have been in a decline since 2008, essentially, when the last recession happened.
when the state started funding COLAs at less than 100%. We have steadily been in a slow decline over those last several years, and these past couple of years has felt like a more accelerating decline because of we've run out of any easy cuts to make.
What it means is that as we look at reductions, that there is only essentially good work that gets cut from this point forward. We can't save or avoid a cut based on the merits of that function alone, because everyone is doing good work in all corners. And that's what makes this particularly difficult to work, these decisions particularly difficult to work through. So it means that we will end up cutting valued work. And we are at the point, the analogy I've used before is that this is us hitting bone. These aren't surface level cuts anymore. We are hitting bone, and this is what it's going to feel like moving forward at this point. So now to the numbers. Well, this is actually descriptions, and then we'll get to numbers. So the reductions that we're seeing for this year. We're completing the closure of the pastry program. Please know that any program closure, it doesn't amount to immediate savings. There are some savings that happen in 1 year, and depending on the length of the teach outs of the students that are in the program, because we're beholden to students to teach them out of any program we're closing or making inactive, sometimes those cost savings, the actual savings are spread out over 2 years. So we're completing the pastry program closure amounts to a certain amount of savings. Completing the technical drafting program closure that we closed last year is also culminating in savings into the next year. The environmental health and safety manager, this is Krista Kaluzis' position, shifted to the districts. The Dean of Transportation position was reorganized into another dean position, and so this year there are continuing savings on that position into next year. And we're reorganizing how we're supporting accreditation. We're shifting from a budget that supported us in a visit year where we had a lot of activity to pay for to a more sustaining year for the next several years. So there's some cost savings happening in there because of how we're reorganizing in accreditation. Stop me when you have questions. You're like frighteningly silent right now. We're eliminating the Director of Completion and Retention. But no one loses a job, but we are eliminating that position. I put the BAS Program Manager on here, but actually that may shift to a reorganization or realignment, and it could be something that grows back when FTE grows. So you'll see when I do numbers later that there's some question about how much that saves. There's some question about whether another program manager is needed or if it's another type of position, and I'm asking the folks in that area to do some analysis to inform our decision. We are pursuing a 2.5% reduction in select areas. It excludes instruction and it excludes administrative services. But to close the gap of the size of reductions we needed to make, this was a way to approach that. And yes, I know that it goes against the earlier slide where I said we were avoiding across the board cuts. So these are sort of targeted, semi-targeted across half the board cuts. In progress, and not able to share specifics because these are decisions and conversations and negotiations that are in progress now, there are programs that are being placed on, there are 2 programs we're working with to place them on inactive status, and we will cease to offer these 2 programs. Please know that if you're hearing this for the first time and you're panicked about what this means for your area of work, those conversations with the impacted personnel are happening like in the moment this week, and I just didn't get the green light from our VPI folks, Liz or Sayumi, yet to say that I can name them yet, but there are 2 programs that we are closing due to enrollment, not due to budget. And then we are also considering other consolidations and reorganizations presently. The purpose of any reorganization or consolidation was to look at improving or strengthening the functions of those areas, but those also, because they relate to personnel decisions, those aren't ready for public consumption in the moment, but will be once they are finalized. So that's the scope of the reductions. There's also 2 reorganizations and realignments that are impacting that we're considering as part of this process. There's a reorganization happening at Georgetown where we're trying to align the functions appropriately with the actual scope of work that happens there. And it kind of was on our planning sheets as like a big savings at one point and then kind of a smaller savings. And when it came down to what we really need to make sure that Georgetown can run well, it came out to a modest savings, but the reorganization still will be beneficial to the function that's there and really seeks to leverage the expertise of those folks that are already in those positions. And then we are also, I'm sorry, I use different types of nomenclature here, but institutional effectiveness reorganization. We are reorganizing the accreditation role and also utilizing this opportunity to account for the assessment recommendation that we got out of the accreditation process. So we're doing some reorganization in this budget, which reports to Greg Dempsey, our institutional effectiveness person, and we are creating a faculty assessment role and a sustaining accreditation coordination function. And we're able to do that in a way that's cost neutral. So there are some savings that's coming out of this reorganization. It's not all cuts and reductions. We have prioritized some increases. So I mentioned earlier, increasing apprenticeship budget. So we're trying to capture some ready and available FTEs that will sustain our budget in the medium term, in the medium to long term. 320 FTEs. We're adding a custodial position, as I mentioned. We're also adding a safety and security or emergency management function, position, resource. I think I'm light on the details of what the actual position or function is, but we're sorry, that was less specific than I'd hoped to be, but investing there. Tutoring has lived on a very tenuous patchwork of funds. So we're trying to find a way to better support those funds. You might remember me in a VPSS role in past talking about how the $15 minimum wage really decimated our tutoring capacity because we had to increase hourly pay by so much that we had to reduce the number of hours. So we're trying to stabilize the tutoring budget a bit more with an additional investment. And then I mentioned the assessment and accreditation coordination in response to accreditation. And this one needs more work, but we're looking to strategically invest in faculty development capacity. So Robin's going to start showing us actual numbers, and I'll be her backup to talk about to contextualize the actual numbers that are tied to these reductions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance here this afternoon. You'll have to forgive my low energy. I am exhausted. This whole doing 2 job things is kind of like, you got to be careful what you ask for, because, oh yeah, I can do it. I can take it on. My God,
I'm sitting right here.
that's okay. But I am thankful for this opportunity. Actually, I do have to say, and this is just a total kudos to you, Rosie, the way that you're being proactive about things. Yes, we're kind of at the door as far as kicking the can down the road. We can no longer do that. So we're forced to make some decisions. But I can appreciate, and I think you all can, just the level of detail that's being shared, and she's sharing the information. And College Council, again, another shout out to you guys, because I think this was such a smart move of having you come in early and get started in on the conversations earlier so we can hear the voices, so we can answer the questions, answer the concerns, and get us all on the same page, really, so that you understand exactly what's going on with your institution. Okay, so moving along.
Just hit the arrow.
Arrow. Ta-da. Okay, so here are some numbers for you. We were talking about the reductions that we're looking to make for this next fiscal.
So the program closure final savings, one of the questions that came in on the interweb was around what is the actual savings from closing the pastry program. There was some savings last year. The savings moving forward this year is about $307,000 that we're saving from completing the pastry closure, and then the other $114,000 is from the final savings from the closure of the technical drafting program.
Dean of Transportation.
That one was a half a year savings. Oh, I should mention that any of the numbers that we have up here that relate to salary, relate to personnel are showing you salary and benefits. On that, benefit rate is about 35% of salary. So there's a half a year savings on the Dean of Transportation consolidation. The accreditation reorg amounted to about 30,000. The EHS, I'm sorry, stands for Environmental Health and Safety, and that's a savings of about 80,000. The Director of Completion, about 80,000 as well. The BAS Program Manager that I described earlier, we have it on here as about a $60,000 savings, but that might shift as we come to understand what the need is to run the program at the size that it is now. It's at about 60 FTE. And there is a program manager that's there, so I'm asking them to do some analysis around what are the additional supports that they need. They have a vacant program manager position, so this is holding that vacancy right now. The 2.5% semi-targeted reduction amounts to about 145, and then there's the two programs that I mentioned earlier. So far, the savings on those two programs that we're in negotiations around is about 86,000. So this amounts to it's 963,000. It's approximately $1 million in reductions that we're lining up for next year.
I'm assuming some of that salary you're not paying more to district.
I'll explain. One of us will explain how that works now, because that's a whole new world about how that happens.
We're gonna pay some more.
Yeah.
And then, okay, on the
You
opposite
can do the good
end,
news.
all right. This is where we are choosing to invest our resources. So as Rosie was speaking about earlier, we do definitely want to get some more custodial staff. It's unfortunate that division was hit so hard, and be it part of the nature of the job, and then just part of it, just people not coming to work. We want to get that fully staffed so that at least we can get our surroundings in a much better condition. I know that's one of the topics we always talk about, the restrooms and the papers on the floor and everything else. But always keep in mind, the reason it's like that is we just don't have the personnel. And none of us like living this way, believe me. But it's an unfortunate circumstance that we find ourselves in. In addition to the custodial staff, as Rosie had said previously, the security emergency prep person, and this will help. This is like the liaison communication between the facilities from facilities and security, so that when those big events do happen, there's a person there who can either contact all the right parties right away without taking a person from attending to that emergency. Okay, so it's not an actual security agent who should be out tending to the person laying on the ground, but it's somebody who works in between the divisions to help make sure that we're maintaining all of our standards, everybody's safe, and that things are being taken care of, not just human body-wise, but also the facilities with the tables and the chairs and weak chairs so nobody falls over and gets hurt, that kind of thing.
An example of that is sometimes James Lewis is both responding to an incident, and sometimes he's the guy that has to put out the actual notification around it. And so it's trying to staff up in a way that enables security officers to do the security support and keep the connective tissue to communications. Ty won't know, or Mac won't know when a notice has to go out if James is off running and attending to the actual incident. So we're just I don't know if folks realize that, but we're just not even staffed to that level of sophistication, basic sophistication, where something can happen and we can communicate it in a time while it's happening. That's right.
Robin, I got a question.
Yes.
About that. Does the custodial amount include benefits?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
That is, yeah.
Looking at the tutoring increase, and then with the gain of apprenticeship, so we can get some more FTE. And the Georgetown was neutral.
It ended up being neutral.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's fortunate. And then faculty professional development, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
So around apprenticeship FTEs, we have worked to prioritize some funds so that we can capture the FTEs. It was a conscious decision that Cabinet made after lots of discussion and back and forth. Essentially what we have demand for, I'll stand up so they can hear me, sorry. What we have demand for is about $3.2 million in contracts, which is about 960 FTEs from apprenticeships. All that the college has budgeted for the last, as many years as we can tell, at least 5 to 7 years, is 1.2 million.
So what we've actually allocated to the apprenticeships hasn't kept pace with the amount of demand. And so what we're trying to do in the moment, what we're trying to do moving forward is fund to demand, try to fund closer to demand so we don't have to say goodbye to a third of those FTEs, 600 of those FTEs. So it's a big number and it pushes around other numbers, but we have really tried to focus on savings in some areas to be able to reprioritize this. And I'll just remind folks that apprenticeships and those FTEs, maintaining our FTE stabilizes us into the medium to long-term future. If we didn't fund those and we applied the million in the other pots of money or in the other functions that are here, then we would just push the cliff a little further out that we would fall into at that point. So I think it's hard to explain, and I know I'm not doing a great job of it in the moment, but it is the enrollment, the relationship between enrollments and budgets is really key to understand. FTEs buy us some medium and long-term stability, whereas tuition generation is what fuels us in the current year, and along with the allocation. Corinne?
So with the apprenticeship, it sounds like I heard you say that we got basically guaranteed a $3.2 million that we could bring in if we could afford those contracts.
So Corinne was asking clarification around the $3.2 million figure I mentioned earlier. We have demand for about 960 to 1,000 FTEs from apprenticeships. We have to pay for those contracts to bring those. We have to pay Puget Sound Energy or the iron workers or the Construction Trades Coalition to bring those apprenticeships to South, to be able to count them on our books and offer them through those groups. So it's actually money that we have the opportunity to spend for the purposes of claiming those FTEs for ours.
And once we spend that money, we will make more money off of each student.
Once we spend that money, we will get that money in our FTEs and in the discounted tuition. So apprenticeships pay a 50% tuition rate. So we get the 50% tuition, and in the medium to long term, we get the FTE as a part of our calculation for what the state allocates us.
So is there any talk about, I mean, if they're that valuable, which it does sound like, especially in the long term, they're super valuable, is there any talk or opportunity to borrow money from the state to be able to purchase those contracts now?
So Corinne's asking if since they're so valuable, is there opportunity to borrow from the state to fund those? No. Short answer, no. However, there is a state effort. The statewide effort is to try to negotiate. This gets into a bit of the weeds, but each contract is different and they're negotiated differently because there's different bodies. There's two rates that we can offer apprenticeships, and a lot of colleges are offering the cheaper rate to be more competitive. What we're trying to do as a system, because all of us who do apprenticeship work are experiencing it as a loss leader.
Right.
We're investing money to bring in FTEs, like a grocery store discounts something to bring in customers. It's a loss leader for us because it gets us FTEs, but it costs us money. And so we're trying to tip that balance a little bit more in favor of the actual money that we collect meeting the cost of
Yes.
operations.
Yes, you said yes.
Right?
Yes,
That's
right
right.
there, right there.
That,
Okay, and this is a side-by-side comparison I attempted, ran out of time because I was doing so much work today. But just looking from 2019 to 2020. So
Go ahead.
Our budget for 19, we were at 28 million. Originally, it was 32 million, okay? So 32 million operational budget. But with the assistance from Running Start and International, as Rosie was saying, that's some revenue sources right there. They were able to kind of offset some of the costs. So it's at 28 million. Fast forward to now, I'm looking at 26 million. I'm not done yet. I still have a bunch of salaries to input, and I think one or two big apprenticeship contracts that need to still get accounted for. And regarding the salaries, and I do have to say this little plug. So last week when district was here and they said that the salaries were not stacked, yeah, okay, they were partially right. So the conversation continued long after that meeting last week. So we found out that classified, the increases are stacked, but for everybody else, it's just that one flat rate. Okay, so I had to go and recalculate a whole bunch of people. That's okay.
so that means 8% for everybody, but
And then classified went because they're also 8%. They went 3
3
and then 5. Yes. Yes, please.
Is that 8% of the average or 8% of that individual?
8% of that individual. So each of us will get an 8% increase this with our starting July 1st.
Yes.
So with your July 25th paycheck, you'll see an 8% increase on your own salary. It's calculated, what Robin's referring to is it's calculated differently for classified, where they get 3%, a 3% increase first, and then a 5% increase on that 103%.
On the new number, yeah. So it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more.
Does that also happen on July 30th?
Yes. Yes. Thank God. Yeah. None of that mid-year. Yeah. No. So July 1st and then next July 1st. So none of that January stuff, because that was a big old mess.
There's another in this biennium. There's another 3% coming in July 2020.
2020.
Next year.
2020. Okay. Looking at the reductions, another side by side. Looking at last year to where we are going forward for next year, or 19 to 20. And then the investment. And then the most favorite cell, the district cost. So yeah, that's real. That's like for real.
So the south portion right now stacks up above 6 million of what we will pay to the district. So, sorry, Zoom. So Louisa asked the question earlier about how don't we end up paying for the environmental health and safety position when it goes to the district, and that, yes, that's true. We pay for it in a different way. So we're not going to be IDC'd for a third of that person's salary. What happens is now Siegel is saying what they used to do is take it all off the top and take all of their expenses off the top of all 3 of the college's allocations and then allocate to the colleges based on FTE. And we pooled tuition in that way. What happens now is that they take it off the bottom. So we get our full allocation from the state, and then we get an invoice for our share of the costs of Siegel. And so the environmental health and safety position, there's a question that we'll get to about how the 900,000, the district wants to invest 900,000 in apprenticeships to keep those. So we will pay a portion of that 900 through the invoicing process. They're taking it off the bottom. Harrison Larry, did I use adequate terminology to describe that?
She was singing your praises earlier.
Oh,
she
yeah.
really was.
I have my notes from your budgeting class before this one. But right, it's off the top or something. Okay. So that is something that we're going to continue to watch because the Siegel number isn't solid yet. We're waiting to see, they haven't finalized some of those functions and the costs at the moment. Yes, ma'am.
Who oversees the Siegel budget?
Who oversees the Siegel budget? The chancellor and the vice chancellor for finance.
So it seems like when decisions are made on the college level, there's councils, there's cabinets, there's voting, there's lots of decisions making, different watchdogs and things like that. How does district, who's their watchdog?
So Matt's asking, I believe, a shared governance question. At the campus level, each of the colleges has a shared governance structure that informs the budget development process moving forward and seeks input. At Siegel, they don't have an equivalent district level shared governance body. The way that the budget development works at Siegel is that the different budget leaders presented their budgets and requests to the chancellor, who put together the proposed budgets, and then he brings it to the chancellor's cabinet, where the presidents do sit for feedback. And so the presidents are a part of the feedback among, it's the 3 presidents, I think the 3 vice chancellors, associate vice chancellor, and then the rest of the Siegel leadership team. And so we do have a voice at that table, and we do talk about the impacts of an increasing budget to the colleges. Siegel has no other source of revenue than the college invoicing system. So, yeah.
I just want to I got a question from Tish. It's sort of asking the same thing. Is there a process in place where the colleges can provide input regarding the hiring, funding, allocations made at the district?
There is not a shared governance body, and there is the mechanism to give feedback would have been the forum that happened 2 weeks ago.
And the follow-up.
And then some follow-up, yeah.
I mean, he invited people.
He invited feedback, yes.
Well,
And the trustees ultimately approve all of our budgets, but all the development work happens. So those are astute questions, Matt, to ask. Jeffrey?
It just seems like when we're all looking at having to cut into the bone to make sure that we're getting our budgets, Siegel's getting an increase in their budget from South alone of 1.4 million. It's like,
No, 6 million. They're getting an increase of 1.4. Yeah, you're
so
right.
it's kind of like, where's the due diligence and looking at, okay, I'm asking you to cut your budget, but I'm gonna take more from you. Where's the ethics at?
I mean, it's ethical in that it is above board. I mean, it's something that is, it's all transparent for us to see, and there's no funds being spent on unallowable or unethical things. I think the question is, and the feeling that I feel represented in yours and others' questions is around the impact and how it feels to actually go through the process. And this year's a shift because it's very different than it has been in the past. The Siegel functions, so for example, Siegel took on HR. I'm looking at Rosemary over your shoulder. Siegel took on IT. So all those ASI initiatives that brought functions centrally to the district happened, and that in alone increased Siegel's costs and decreased ours because the HR budget that used to live at South followed over to Siegel Center, for example. So that happened. And then we're also leading in a way where the district leadership is looking for more ways to collaborate and connect across the campuses. And so to do that takes more of the centralized extent. So for example, Starfish is a tangible example of how this is playing out. Starfish costs in the early years about $500,000 to bring this technology on board for all of the campuses to use similarly. And it's being built similarly and implemented exactly the same way across the campuses, the 3 campuses. And so instead of each campus sort of paying our part into that, district assumes the cost and then we get billed for it, essentially. So what the presidents have been uniform in our voice in saying is that we want to build in accountability measures for the new and developing functions at district.
Yes.
So
Yes.
for example, we want an analysis of ASI version 1 and how effective that is, and recommendations for how we proceed or don't proceed with how that's been rolled out. Because there's conversations around how to define ASI 2.0, for example. So I think we're hitting it on things that are very real and very difficult.
Yeah.
But I can assure you that I speak for South very clearly and very loudly, and really work to try to understand how things get impacted, and then triangulate information with the finance office to make sure that I understand and am vocalizing these impacts correctly.
And that was great, Rosie. Your answer was great. I mean, that's why you're the president. But it's fair to say that yes, as ASI is rearing its head, maturing, that the functions of the district are increasing. So they do need more staff to handle these functions. But it's expensive. It's we're in Seattle, everything, the minimum wage and all of those things taken into account. But at the same time, I do know that Rosie and the presidents, they do listen to us, because I'm always the voice saying, okay, wait, how much is it going to cost? And why are we paying that? And I need all of the information. I need all of the explanations to finally go, all right, okay, I get it. But Rosie's good. She's listening and she's taking our concerns forward. I've seen the stuff behind the scenes, not all of it, but some of it. And it's good to know that she's fighting for us. So I like that question, Jeff, because you're right there with me. So yeah, I appreciate that one as well. And then another sore point, I do want to say that even though the state is funding our increases, my grants folk, where are you? I know.
Self-support.
Yeah.
Don't stop.
I know you're feeling it. I know you're feeling it. So I can't even begin, because you got to understand, before I found out the state was funding us and I kept hearing about this possible 8 and 9.2, what is that? I was freaking out. I was the one in my office just having fits going, there's no way we can do, we can't do this. I know what the numbers look like. And then a couple of weeks later, she's like, well, wait, we're getting a buzz. Maybe the state's going to kick in some dollars. And that's when it was like 35% or 65% or whatever it was. So now they're coming back with the 98%, which is fine.
Oh, yeah.
It's not 100,
So
but it's
we're-
98. We can do that.
What Robin's referring to is the COLA is funded at 100%. The cost of living increases are funded at 100%. The King County premium pay increase that's in there only calculates to 98% of support. So the colleges have to come up with the other 2%. So
we can do that. It's a little irritating.
we
so
opted
we
not
can do
to
that.
fight it. We opted,
Yeah.
the Seattle presidents decided not to vote against it. We opted not to open that can of worms and fight the 2% again. I think it was the right call. But what Robin's referring to with folks that are on grants or fee accounts or anything that's not state funded, those salary increases are mandated but not funded.
Yeah.
So the TRIO program
My trio.
have to give an 8% increase to all staff, but there's no state money that can go and fund that 8% increase. So what happens on a program that's all staff and then programming, it means that programming gets reduced so that the staff funding can meet the obligation. So, I mean, and that's gonna happen to anybody that's not on, did I get that right, Leon?
Yes.
That, Sarah, that's happening to anybody that's not on state funds. So any fees, certain revenues,
Right.
and any other grants. Stephanie manages a lot of grants. Patrice, I think that happens to the money that continuing ed. So we actually have a lot of functions that aren't on state money, for which this is an international, for which this is a real difficult one.
Hey, wait a minute. Okay, so I'm putting the dots together, and you guys, I'm living between two worlds. I'm closing the books in 1819 and trying to do all this for 1920, and it's just hitting me. So, if my grant folk and continuing ed and everybody, if they're not funded from the state and they have to adjust accordingly, will they be seeking homes on state? And if they do,
some may if they're able, but we would have planned for that.
okay.
The others are essentially looking at how to move the figures around their budget. So
Okay.
they're either reducing travel, goods and services,
Okay.
or other costs, or reducing hourly
Okay.
employees to fund the full-time salaries.
Okay, so if you guys aren't, and I'm talking specifically to grants
That's
contracts,
what I
if you're not already in talks, looking at your budgets within those accounts, let's set up some time. Maybe I'll just do like an all group kind of thing so I can talk to you guys.
how we're accounting for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's like, sometimes it takes a while for the clarity to come, but I'm just, as I'm saying the words, it's like coming back, reverberating in my head. Oh my gosh, this is stuff. This is real stuff. But just so I have a better understanding, we can share some ideas and get some momentum going that way, because I want to know. I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know. All right. Thank you. Yes.
Aaron Carson is all for it.
Yeah.
She's running Title III grants.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you. Good. Okay. Good. Yes. I think I do. I can.
Yep, pie chart. Tap, tap. Click, click. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay. So this is, Robert and I can kind of tag team this. So some of these are some of the other financial strategies we're also looking at. It's not just about the state allocation. Go ahead. Addressing our deficits. So this is where this year Cabinet has taken a very forward stance at looking at and wrestling with the deficits that have developed in some areas over many years. And so I shared it in the budget video. There are some of the largest deficit accounts amount to over $1 million in deficits.
Yes.
And that should make your eyes bug out like it just did. Deficits we're carrying year to year. It's not healthy. This is where the household budget analogy really works. So we are really looking at addressing our deficits especially through some of the one-time money.
Yes.
So that's something that I'm working with the finance office on developing a deficit strategy on both the state side, because there's deficits on the state accounts and there's deficits on grants and contracts as well.
Yes. Thank you.
It's uncomfortable.
Revising our reserve
Yeah,
strategy.
go ahead.
So we can't, as you know, we don't just keep going back to our reserves and bleeding them dry because we're ending up with nothing. I did proactively set aside money in 2 reserve accounts and 1 contingency account. And primarily the funds that I put into the 2 reserve accounts were to fund the increases that we had in January, which was a pain and horrible, and I hope we never do those mid-year increases again. But I digress. Having put the funds there, I knew that we were going to be okay by the time year end comes up. So at least as far as that part goes, we're okay at the time of year end. But then remembering that the reserves really are there for those actual, like I said, what did I say? Blizzard, catastrophic. We don't want to treat it like a savings account where we pick off a little here and pick off a little there. We've had, I can tell you, many conversations, long conversations. Rosie likes to talk. But we have very good informative conversations of how we're going to strategically review the reserves and use what is necessary to either pay back some of the old deficits that we're carrying or help alleviate some of the pain that we're experiencing now with things just being out of whack, over budget, overspent. We hadn't planned for it or allocated for it. But again, we're having huge, long conversations about this. So it's not, because I don't want this responsibility of me just sitting in my office, waving a magic wand and spending money to make things happen nice and clean and shiny. Nope, can't do it by myself. So it's good that we do have someone here who grounds us in the conversation. Like I said, very proactive, looking forward and backward is the case, finding those old deficits and having a plan and a strategy to clean them up. So thank you for that. And with the reserves, like I said, being very responsible of what we have in them and how we're spending them.
The analogy I use is it's like having a savings account, but having credit card debt, having a big savings account, but having big credit card debt. We need to take that savings account down, pay off some of that debt to free up our income that comes in, our revenues, our tuition, our allocation. So that's been the strategy, and it is complex work, but I think we're on the right path. And yeah, so this is sort of so revising how we use revenue. And so part of looking at reserves, cash balances, there's some accounts that have large balances that aren't being spent from, and then looking at how we're utilizing our revenues. Instead of using a running start revenue to sort of clean up, for example, running start revenue probably helps to clean up the apprenticeship overspend in years past. So instead of doing it that way at the back end, being intentional about the investment here, and I'm gesturing to you all like it's your money, but actually utilizing and assigning running start revenue as part of our operational budget now, instead of just hoarding it all and then applying it where we can. It's being much more intentional about our budget planning, utilizing all of our known sources of revenue.
Yes, because we can use the revenue in this manner, which is wonderful.
And many colleges do.
They do, yeah. When I first got here, I was told that, oh yeah, we can only use Running Start International if it's an emergency. So I was very frugal and I never wanted to touch it. So I would take little pieces away. Please, can I have some money, please?
That's not Jesse or Tara's message. That was sort of the institutional lore around how we did budgeting. And I don't know why I keep aligning you with this budget. They actually use
Yes, that's what we'd be like.
they use a very small portion of the budget for the actual Running Start function. Yeah, and then looking at these existing cash balances accounts, trying to identify where we have one-time money and how one-time availability and apply them to one-time expenses. So this is where we might take a bookstore cash balance that we're looking at and applying it to a deficit to start working on clearing out some of these deficits. So we are essentially this year trying to get our financial house in order.
Yes, which is beautiful, which is, about time, right? It's the responsible way for us to behave. And because things are shifting, everything's changing between either the state allocation or the district way of processing things. And now that we're responsible for our own tuition, that's going to be interesting too. We have to. We just have to utilize everything that we have, search all of the known variables so we can reach a good, solid foundation.
And and this isn't in criticism of any of the past approaches to budgeting. I think that what has happened at South is that our budgeting and planning hasn't evolved with the changing enrollment and fiscal environment. We've been operating as if we were in the olden days where we were a little more flush
So it's not a criticism of past practice. What it is, it's a necessary evolution to how we need to be operating and behaving in this current environment and the environment that we are projecting into the future. So
Very good. That was very well put. This might be a little small and
Pie chart.
blurry, but I know you guys like pie charts. It's a pie chart. And it's basically showing us where we are as of May 1st, how we're ending the year, what we're looking like.
can you read some of those numbers for us?
So let's see. We have instruction with 18.5 million in the budget, and we spent 14.2. A lot of it, when you do see the numbers in the balance, that's actually money that can still be spent. And trust me, it will be. Don't get excited thinking we're gonna carry over 7 or 6 or even 5 or $3 million. We're not. All of everything seems to come in between now and July. So yeah, I don't know why that is. I always encourage people to pay their bills and get reimbursed in a timely fashion, Don't hold on to your receipts and get reimbursed in a timely fashion. But I don't know if they hear me. Maybe I haven't said it enough. So I will start to send out frequent emails just to remind you guys. You can ignore them, but at least when you see them, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's one of her emails. But read it just anyway, because I might be offering you a prize for answering a question or something. Just check it out anyway. It's no, it's like some baked goods or something. It's, again, I really believe in my heart of hearts we can do better. We really, really can. Even with all of the obstacles set before us, with the careful planning, with the strategic decisions, all right, keeping everything above board, getting your input and feedback. There's a way we can turn this around. Will it be painful? Sure. Is it gonna hurt? But we've got to come out of this stronger, right? Because that which does not kill us, right? We've got to come out of this stronger, because getting to a level foundation to where we can build a solid structure is where we need to be. We're starting to look at it. We're starting to notice some of the cracks and some of the unevenness, all right? And we're addressing those things. And again, I just have to say, Rosie, it's really nice seeing you in work, because you are making some changes. To me, being money, it's all about money. They're necessary changes. They're things that will make us stronger. And I appreciate the fact that you guys do come and listen and look and learn and see what's going on and offer opinions and suggestions or tutoring on our budgets if needed. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I just wanted to take that minute.
We'll go to questions now.
And we go to questions now.
Okay. So, and you know, while we're making this quick shift, it's not, there's good work happening by many folks across campus. So we're benefiting from that. And so Mac, you want to pull up, do you have all of them in here?
Yeah, I should.
That one?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, shoot. So Mac has collected some of the questions that have come in, and do you want me just to kind of tick through them?
Do you need me up here? I can read them off if you want me to.
Everybody can read those, I guess.
Okay.
Thanks, Mac.
Yeah.
Thanks for collecting them. So this was a question about the 100%. Is Olympia allocating 100% of the 5% COLA adjustment plus the benefit that goes up, or are the college districts still responsible? We addressed that earlier. It's the 3% is 100% funded. This is gonna get the 3% in the COLA is 100% funded. The regional premium pay is 98% funded, and so we will be funding that 2% on our own.
Yes.
Folks want a status on the status update on the wellness center. That was not discussed in the budget. That is a process that's underway that utilizes a student fee, the campus enhancement fee, to seed the development of a new wellness center. It has seen a hiccup because of the capital budget delay that happened a year ago. And so we are moving forward with that. Jeffrey and I are actually going to put out a joint statement here shortly to students and to staff and faculty about where we've decided to go with that. We are pursuing that currently and working on a design that will bring us a 17,000 square foot new construction building over behind Olympic Hall next to Rocky. And that will take up in earnest later this year when there's a process there, but just without taking too much airtime here, look for an upcoming email about that, but it is forthcoming, and thanks to those who've been involved with that. Okay, I'm just going to read this one verbatim and then answer it. Since the college lost millions of dollars per year running the pastry program, shouldn't its closure bring financial prosperity and harmony to the college? So I'll answer that straight. So the assertion was never that it cost us millions of dollars. The assertion was that, like any of the other programs, including technical drafting, there were enrollment declines, cost, program viability elements, including cost per FTE, that were untenable and unsustainable into the future. And as I shared earlier, it is going to bring in the coming year $307,000 in savings into the next year. North and Central appear to have 6.5 to 9.5 times more e-learning and instructional support than South. The difference begs further investigation. Would College Council, Admin Services, and our President's Cabinet be willing to research this matter and further report back to the campus at a future budget forum? And then there was a second related question: how will e-learning be supported in this upcoming budget? Yes, I am very interested to learn about this. We've been discussing it in cabinet working sessions about how we're structured differently. And it's also a conversation at the district level to look at how e-learning is structured across the district. There is an investment in e-learning coming at the district level. The district will be investing in, it's the NC SARA agreement, which I can't describe it effectively, and I don't.
It allows for students in other states to take courses from Washington State without any state penalties against the other state.
So e-learning is essentially regulated in that you can't offer courses to out-of-state students unless you are part of the SARA agreements, and we have not been. So the district is paying that fee on behalf of all of us, and so we will all of our programs will be able to be offered nationwide, which we haven't been able to do until now. I think that is actually quite stunning. So we're going to move forward with that, and I think that does start to open us up for more investment on from e-learning.
Hey, Rosie, how
Yes.
realistic is it that someone from the East Coast would take a class or course here?
I think
People do that all the time.
Right, Max asking how realistic is it that somebody from the East Coast would do a class here? I mean, it may not be, they might not come to us for an English 101, for example, but they might come to us for sustainable building sciences, or some of our other more specialized programs. With new hires, okay. So with all the new, I'm going to read this and answer this straight as well. With all the new hires, i.e. expansion of district personnel, student services, etc., why isn't enrollment on the rise? Exactly what are these new hires doing to increase FTEs, and who is paying their salaries? Us, the taxpayer? So I'll answer that in two parts. One is that student services has not had an increase in personnel on the state allocation. Student services is funded almost, I think it might be more than half now, on grants or soft funds. And actually less than half of student services personnel are actually funded on the state allocation. So for example, everybody in student life is funded on student fees. There are the TRIO grants, the other grants, Seattle Promise money, Running Start.
Dan is one person on the state budget.
Oh, right, out of student life, yeah. There's one staff member out of student life that's on the state budget. The only other functions that are on the state budget are advising and enrollment services and financial aid, are predominantly. They're in the state budget. So so we haven't actually added any student services position. If there is the impression that there are many new hires in that area, it is likely due to either the Seattle Promise positions that are being filled right now, and there are several of them that are tagged for staff, but those are funded off of city money, and that their impact isn't yet accounted for because their work hasn't started. And then there are obviously grants impacts. I believe that student services does a big part in maintaining and building our retention versus bringing in new enrollments. So I think that is a key to understand. And then the district, we talked about district personnel and the impact earlier. And yes, it is, if it's on the state side, it is paid by the taxpayer through state allocation. And if it's on the federal side, it's also paid by the taxpayer through federal taxes. But there are other sources of funds as well. So the taxpayer is engaged in funding these salaries. what steps are being taken to increase our enrollment? There's a number of things that are at play there. Retention initiatives, guided pathways work relates to increasing enrollment. We are shifting the value of FTE from being rooted in the butts and seats, get new enrollments in the door mentality to keep the students that we have in an environment where we are seeing statewide and nationwide declining enrollment. So there is not a mysterious pot of enrollments to go and uncover and unearth. It really is going to be about us strengthening our skills and keeping the students that we have through to completion as a way of strengthening our enrollments. And then there's the apprenticeships, which is always the asterisk.
I just had a comment from EOC said TRIO EOC and Student Services works to increase FTEs through outreach and enrollment.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that.
Thank you. So, folks on Zoom would have seen that. During the 1920 budget hearing with Chancellor Pan, he said the district needs $900,000 to manage Georgetown's apprenticeship program. I wasn't sure what this meant. Starting from next year, is the district the one running the apprenticeship program, including the personnel changes? No. So what the district is agreeing to is they're going to fund $900,000 worth of our contracts. South continues to operate the apprenticeships. The district will fund $900,000 of those. It's the equivalent of 320 FTEs. The FTEs may be shared with Central and North, those that they're purchasing. That's up for discussion right now. We've proposed that they be shared with Central and North, but the district is investing $900,000 in our apprenticeship program. So no, there's no change. The personnel aren't going to report to the district. They'll still be South personnel. How long? I will answer this one straight up too. How long will the budget crisis last? I can't say. We are 10 years into a decline, starting with the recession in 2008. With some of that, and we saw some enrollment peaks, but then we saw some valleys come in the last several years. So we have been in a steady decline. What I'm hoping to lead us towards is towards stabilization with the FTE levels that we have, and a more prepared and intentional approach to anticipate and respond to any further declines in the future. So I can't say how long this will last, but many across the nation will acknowledge that this is the new norm. There has been systematic disinvestment by states in their state's community college systems across the nation. And Washington was among some of the worst in terms of disinvestment of state funding from the community college functions in the state. This last legislative session started to remedy that. So I'll just skip to that last question. The Workforce Investment Act, Substitute House Bill 2158, called for higher pay for high demand salaries. This act does start to amend some of the funding challenges in previous years, starting with the 100% funding of COLAs. But just in the vein of this question, it's paying for high demand faculty salaries, and how and when will this be implemented? Those will be locally negotiated. So AFT will need to will negotiate with the Seattle Colleges District about how to apply high demand salaries per the legislative agreement. So that process will be taken up by AFT as it will in every other locality, negotiating locality. Can we prioritize some of the money for building maintenance and cleaning? Yes. Broken chairs, table legs, broken blinds. Yes, I addressed that earlier. How much is South allocated on the mini grant budget for fiscal year 1920 for classified professional development? I marked this one as one that I don't have an answer for. And I don't know that there's anybody in the room who does. You're not speaking up, so I'm gonna guess you don't have it, Rosemary.
It was a grant?
It was, this one I think I'd like to do more research on and get back to the campus community. Oh, that was your question. Okay, hold back. So this is around CDAC, support for CDAC specifically, and for CDAC professional development. I'm gonna research that and then I'll get back to you. And then if you wanna share that question, that answer with your CDAC colleagues once I get it. Okay, thank you for. Okay, so there was, Dr. Pan made mention to something, and so we're going to research that and get back. Not for the, okay. So we need to see how much there is for South. So we'll do, that's marked as a follow-up question. And then this was a question that I also had to defer. I'd like to know how the U2 fee will be allocated for 1920. Did the board already make the final decision where and how much will be distributed?
Jeffrey probably can answer.
Jeffrey, do you know that one?
Yeah,
It's
so
student.
There's always a call out to the campus in the winter quarter or the beginning of the spring quarter for the application process. We held 2 meetings. We have 1 final meeting coming up.
Okay.
And I haven't heard a solid figure of the allocation total package. It's in the upward figure of 400,000.
Okay.
So I believe Mr. Johnson is still working with Robin to solidify the
Okay.
final allocation figure, but we are in the process of allocating. We have 1 more meeting. And we'll
Okay.
close the books.
So Jeffrey reported for those on Zoom that they're currently meeting. There was a call out, as there always is, at the end of winter, beginning of spring, for requests. And so the student governed board is currently meeting, and they're awarding 400,000. And so that will be communicated out once their decision is made shortly.
Well, point of clarification, we have not awarded one.
Oh, you haven't awarded.
That's what's been allocated out of the UTPs that have been paid by the students.
Oh, okay. So that's what we've collected?
Approximately.
400,000 is what we've collected. They haven't finalized allocations, just to,
Approximately.
okay. And update on new staffing roles. I gave that earlier, but if there's hanging questions on that, and then I talked about
So Aaron
2150.
Barzan wants to say, I'd like people to understand that the elimination of the director of retention and completion means dissolution of the whole department. There are plans to move some, but not all of the work elsewhere.
Yes, Aaron. Yes, folks. We're closing the completion and retention function. I hope this is personally painful because I worked with Aaron to build it 5 years ago, and so and many of you have spoken the praises of how the completion coaches have helped in various programs, helped with retention and completion directly. And this is an example of when I say we're cutting bone. We are cutting perfectly good functions to be able to make our budget work.
However, to clarify that is we're strengthening kind of a safety net by the way in which we're restructuring it. So the concept of what we're trying to do with completion coaching is sort of follow in some ways the TRIO model for all of our students. I mean, if we were Blue Sky, that's what we do, is we do a more holistic handling of students from the time they come into the door. By the way in which we're restructuring it, we think that we're going to actually strengthen that end-to-end process for more students. And Aaron is going to be hiring a completion coach function with the Title III funding, and we just have to figure out how we're doing that because not all students will get all services. We're going to try to bridge that a little bit with some gap handling that way. But we really do, those of us who have been involved in the discussion and the team, we're thinking that we're actually strengthening this function as, you know, let no crisis go unwasted is the model. So we think that we're going to actually come up with something that's going to work very well for how we can serve all our students in a more holistic way.
So just to repeat and paraphrase for the folks on Zoom, Joyce Allen sharing that the conversations around preparing for this shift have created the opportunity to look at how we can strengthen the completion and retention work more holistically throughout the various functions in student services. So, you know, it's going to be something that's going to continue to be on the table because it's valued work and valued effort as well.
I had a comment from Allison Pugh from Sustainable Building. She said there seems to be a lot of reliance on faculty for growing enrollments in individual programs. This doesn't seem to align with our priority around completion instead of growing enrollments. So Joyce kind of answered that, but.
There, I mean, it's when the comment was around perhaps an over-reliance on faculty to grow enrollments. I guess I would respond to that in a couple of ways. One is that there are, in some very specialized programs, there are no better spokespeople than the faculty for the programs that they lead. And there are no better educators of the public than the faculty around the career areas that those programs lead to. That being said, we also have both outreach and marketing departments that do a lot of work to do outreach in general for the institution. There are no single program gets their own outreach person. Outreach has to work to speak collectively for the institution and provide specialized information when possible and when necessary. And they have to rely on those who are subject matter experts. And so yes, we will continue to rely on faculty to help outreach about our programs, because there are no better spokespeople than faculty for what it is that they teach and the careers that they prepare students for. Now, when it comes down to sort of workload balancing, which I believe is where Allison's coming from, being in a BAS program, I think that that's where, specific to BAS, this is where, as example, I asked the BAS leadership to really reassess where the workload is allocated there, and to work locally to address that faculty issue, and they're empowered to do that.
Are we going to disclose the financial report each year as the accreditation recommendation?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
We're mandated to.
It's a district function. We have the tools here on campus to pull a very generic report. Sadly, using the legacy system, there's not a lot we can do with it. But at the district, since we do report collectively, it will be processed, and we definitely shared this information with them, so they know that they have to be accountable to this as well.
The next question or comment is around to see how South's expenditures compare to our counterparts at Central and North. That's also something I'm interested in. We once were able to see that with a district produced report, but we're not able to see that because the district stopped producing that report. So we're looking at how we can do that again. Okay, and so this is the second question, I think, is a comment for College Council. Are you going to be able to break down feedback by personnel type?
Yeah, I talked about this with Anton, and I think that is a good idea. I think next year, especially with the budget priority process, gathering that feedback, maybe it is a good idea to do it by classified staff and faculty. So I think that's what we're going to do next year.
So yes, moving forward. I'll read the third one straight up as well. I'm at a loss. They claim transparency, ask for input, yet they do what they plan to do all along. Who or what independent source is auditing district and the colleges within the district? Yeah, I understand. Well, I can't claim to understand the intent of the question or the individual and what they're expressing here. But what I can relate to is that I can understand, now that I sit on with this scope of our budgeting process, that it is very complex. It has a lot of changing factors, which can feel like there's a lack of transparency. I've been pushing for transparency throughout the year, and Cabinet has been great in coming up with ways to do that and working with College Council to find ways to do that. And there are always ways that we're going to get better at this. And I would always hope that we are making leadership decisions that are reflective of the input, that are not just reflective of the input, because we can't do what all the input and all the feedback wants us to do. We have to take that and then make the bigger picture decisions for the institution that account for that, and at least take into consideration the impacts of the decisions. But it's going to be something that I'm always going to be pushing us for, and that I can promise that I'm never going to do perfectly. And so I'm sorry that the individual who submitted this question really feels like that there's a lack of transparency, and I hope that I can earn that trust through the way we do our work into the future. So there's no good response to that. And as far as the independent, the auditing that happens at the district level is done by the state auditor office. And so it's essentially a third party that is run by the state that comes and audits the other state agencies. Okay. Thanks for the money. I'm just skipping to questions. Okay. Were there other questions in the room? Jeffrey.
You mentioned the Dean of Transportation is going to go through a reorg with another team. Who is that dean, and do they have intentions of working with the Issues and Concerns Officer with the USA, since we are constantly advocating something about transportation?
Oh, okay. Sorry. To clarify, that's the Dean of Transportation Instructional Programs, so automotive, diesel, and those instructional programs. And that was the position held by Duncan Burgess. Duncan Burgess was supposed to retire in December, but ended up leaving earlier in the year due to his illness. And so at the time, the decision last year was made to consolidate that work under Kim Alexander, who was previously just the Dean for Aviation. And a couple of other programs. So that body of work went to Kim Alexander, and we were already anticipating Duncan's retirement. But as you all know, he retired earlier than we thought, and also passed away recently. So that's where that scope of work went. Other questions? You got nothing either? Well, if things are emerging for you that you didn't want to ask in a group or that you come upon later, please utilize the College Council feedback mechanism as a way. We really do read all the feedback, and as you can see, we use the questions as is, and we read the comments and take those in. They're not necessarily filtered, and we do share them across cabinet to make sure that everybody on the cabinet leadership team also sees, to understand where folks are coming from.
Yes.
We really need the feedback as we move forward, and just please know that. And suggestions, ideas, we're always open, and just want to thank College Council for organizing. Thank you to the folks that signed in online to participate. We had about, how many on there? 20-ish online at some point, so 15. As you can see, the numbers always change. Yes, Harris, please.
10, 20.
Final number? Right now, we are not looking at a surplus for this year.
No.
Well, you're not looking at a surplus for this
No,
year.
I would be very surprised if I had. Well, okay,
For
so I did.
18-19?
There's a pot that I put the contingency into. Right now at this moment, it's 800, which is lovely. But as we end the year, that's going to get first hit. So. Oh, no.
Closeout will happen
No.
June 30th is last day of the fiscal, but closeout will occur through the summer. So there'll still be some final numbers in. So hopefully we can come in to maybe August or September with what our closeout number was for 18-19.
Yes.
And then at the same time that we're also going to be communicating about what our actual opening number is for 19-20. It's that overlap of the closeout with the inputting the budgets. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Please eat the cookies. We pay for each of those. I know.
Matt, can I borrow your pen? Is it blue?
I got a blue and a black.
Thank you.
It's a jelly.
Yeah, they can put it in.
Gosh, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you,
guys.
sweetie. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I told them. I know. I just have to tell them that okay to put funds in an error. Okay to put the funds in an error account for JSE.
And then there's a second thing, which is they earlier the district absorbed that. And I don't know if that is how Jennifer Stronger understands it.
Okay. Funds removed. JSE error off of current version. That district
Yeah, just to kind of see what your thoughts are.
25K-ish. I was like, I had tons of anxiety.
We can move forward with whatever.
It's like a little more emotional coming into this than I normally feel with doing presentations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot and it's addressing the questions.
I wouldn't say it's like.
People understood. There's a lot of nuances there, and I wanted to get it.
It's straightforward.
I think we still need to
That's the
Yeah.
kind of stuff that they
This
do.
year, next year, after there. And there's
Well, that's how, I mean, you should share the PowerPoint if you have, it's really pretty.
Thanks, Mark.
And I want to tell you that we put 10,000 in our
Trying to get a signature out of you.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Still do business. It's late. Late now. Perfect.
Uh-huh.
29. Thank you very much. And thank you very much. Is this yours? Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks for coming. Thank you for your input. Is this? Yeah, it is. Where's the thing? Where's the thing?
Okay, yeah. I'm looking at you, it's something.